Welcome to another thought-provoking episode of HERcast with Dr. Chito, where we go beyond the surface to challenge limiting norms and spotlight the voices shaping a better, bolder future for women. Today's episode is titled Fixing It from the Roots: Culture, Faith, and Gender Equity. Because real change doesn't happen on the surface, it starts deep in the mindsets, traditions, and beliefs that form the foundation of our society. Now, to help us navigate this powerful and layered conversation is a woman who truly embodies courage, clarity, and conviction, Adaora Onyechere-Sydney Jack. Adaora Onyechere-Sydney Jack is an international broadcast journalist, a strong gender advocate, and a renowned voice for inclusive governance and public policy expert. She's the Executive Director of Gender Strategy Advancement International and a UN Peace Ambassador. She was recognized among the 100 most influential African women by WAFA, a U.S. Women in Congress initiative on emerging women voices. From 2020 to 2022, she headed the Women and Gender Cluster Committee of the African Union Economic and Cultural Council, Nigeria. She's also the author of the best-selling book, Politics, X, and Power, defined by Amazon as a powerful political literary provocateur. Adaora writes the column Women and the World in This Nigeria and Daybreak newspapers, and she's also the technical advisor for the Inter-Party Advisory Council on Strategy and Partnerships, and the creative director, I'm sure you guys have watched the show on AIT, and host of Gender Agenda, a live program on public policy and women's rights on AIT, African Independent Television. I have to add that you see her every morning, I believe at 7 a.m., as the co-anchor of Kakaki, the African Voice on AIT. She's not just asking for change, she's leading it. Get ready for a deep, honest, and hope-filled conversation that invites us all to challenge norms, engage faith with wisdom, and build a future where gender equity is rooted in every part of who we are. Welcome, Adaora, to HERcast with Dr. Chito. I'm such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chito. And well, finally, that's what I'll say. We get to talk. Yeah. Thanks so much.
And for my audience, it's very intimidating to be on media and talk to a media icon. So, Lord help me.
Oh dear.
But this is such a very important conversation. And for some, I don't know, in our society could be seen as dicey conversation, but one that must be had. You've worked deeply in the intersection of policy, media, and advocacy. What would you say is the biggest cultural myth holding back gender equity in Nigeria today?
Well, there's a whole cluster of conversation, especially when you're talking about socialization as an agency. Mm-hmm. And culture varies. You know, culture is a thin line between tradition and religion, you know. In some social spaces, especially at the grassroots level, they are intertwined. You cannot, you know, dissect or remove one from the other. They have such a close clustered relationship. However, I think that it has been emboldened over the years. What used to be communal conversations that didn't really have, you know, the illumination now is emboldened through the media, traditional media, social media. And sometimes it's not even just about the community conversation around those kinds of culture or tradition, but it is how it is emboldened by socialization as a norm.
Yes.
And I think that that is what's happened over the years. So when you think gender equity, I mean, we are confronting identities by the use of semantics. I mean, when we started this conversation, we said, oh, not gender equality, gender equity.
Yes.
But it's gender equality, really.
Yes.
You know, whether we like it or not. Because equity is about, you know, metrics, measurement.
Yes, measurements.
But before you even think about equity, you have to equalize. And our country depends on constitutional democracy. Yet we do not have equal rights. And those are the tenets of our constitution.
Yes.
So when you're thinking equality, it stems off from the constitution, you know. And someone would say, but those words, are you trying to, you know, emasculate women? Are you trying to say women must be like men? The answer is no. Women are women, and they are human beings. Men are men, just as they are human beings. In a space where a man is allowed to thrive, a woman should be allowed to thrive. That is just a conversation. It's a conversation on justice. It's a conversation on fairness. And I say this because when you give, for instance, you're watching a football from behind the fence, and you have three persons of different heights. The one who's taller than the fence has an advantage to see over the fence and watch the football. The one whose head is just below the fence cannot see the fence until there is perhaps a box to enable him to look over the fence. And then the one that has no height at all is behind the fence, not even able to understand what is going on. So he takes 2 extra boxes to just see above what are they looking at? They're all looking at a football game.
Yes.
And that is what we are talking about in terms of equality.
Yes.
Giving equal advantage, opening up the space, giving people the ability to say, I am human first before I am my gender.
Yes.
And I think that is what, culture, tries to mystify. And that is what tradition tries to mystify. They try to circumspect your conditioning as female, as, being guided by the tenets of where you're from, what kind of culture you're exposed to. For instance, inheritance rights, for instance, the widowhood rights, for instance, female genital mutilation. These oddities hide behind, the facets of our culture, but they are not right. So what we are saying is, in terms of trying to refine how culture and tradition, or perhaps religion, looks at gender, they must look at it from a prism of humanity.
Yes.
And I think that's the most important thing.
Yes. And you spoke about culture, and I know that is also sometimes when you're talking about gender equality in terms of culture, because some cultures are really, as you said, like you talked about inheritance. I know that there are places that you mean the Southeast, for example, where a woman can't even own a land, and we have these issues with inheritance as well. But how can we able to advocate this gender equality without them thinking we're anti-culture? Do you understand how, or is there a way to at all? Have you ever come across that kind
of course, I mean, it's on the daily
dilemma?
Absolutely. I believe that there are custodians of cultural practices in every community, and they're often women. And short of saying that some of them are ignorantly protectors of patriarchy, what I like to refer to as patriarchal queens, but they are unaware, because it's from grooming, it's from backgrounding, it's from exposure, it's from being taught that that's the way of life. It's being taught that without this, they lose their farm in that traditional ecosystem. So like the Umuadas, who are the lead queens, when it comes to daughters in the Igbo land, the Yalojas, you have specific groupings of women who have held culture to a standstill, whether for the men's sake or whether for the women's sake, for the men's sake, But I would say this, and I would say it strongly, that for us to really begin to break down that barrier and to begin to look at how we can re-advocate, we need to do some unlearning. And there needs to be a lot of unlearning at the community level. There's so much ignorance within the community conversation of what a woman should be like, who a woman should become, how she is supposed to be seen, beyond she's first a human being, what is right for her, what makes her at peace, what gives her the form of empowerment, how can we embolden her voice, so it's not necessarily about the womanity in her, it's about the society that sees her through their eyes. And I think that's a space we need to unlearn, and we need to go back to the family to start to do that. The family is the smallest yet the most important ecosystem, and trying to redefine some of this normalization of cultural practices that have emboldened patriarchy for years. It is how we look at, raise our boys and our girls. It's how we teach power broking to our boys and our girls. It's how we help the girls to understand that you have an education, you have the ability to decide to go further if you wanted to. It's how to teach the men that education or educating a woman does not limit her from respecting,
Yes.
the norms and practices of culture. Because I can tell you, I mean, I've had conversations where I've had very quite, engaging conversation with friends who went ahead to further and have their doctorate and their PhDs. And at that point, it felt like a sense of empowerment. But then it also looked like a sense of, it for the men, it sort of, demystify their egos. It's certainly setting a sense of competitive,
Okay.
space where the men begin to think, oh, because you have a PhD now,
No,
right?
yes.
Hey, you can't do this. Meanwhile, you're doing everything you've been doing
Yes.
before, but there's this element, that it exposes,
Yes.
and it's also about backgrounding. It is what he's been exposed to. It is the conversations he's having. It's what he's seen on social media. So there needs to be that family, intersection in trying to unlearn and redefine what really, is power. Because this is about power, And when you're thinking about power broken, there's soft power
Yes.
and there's real power. And what I say is that the men would always need soft power. And that soft power is the womanity, is the femininity that women bring to the room, is the nurturing, is the counseling. And I am hoping that, as we even teach these things in schools, our curriculum begins to also look at extensively in stopping the stereotyping of boys and girls, to say that, yes, Ada goes to the river, Obi plays ball. Our textbooks often normalize, patriarchy without knowing it. So it's from the home, and then also having a conversation with the schooling system and the curriculums that are presented.
That's a great idea. I had a guest once that said something. I don't know if you agree with it. That says that we're talking about women supporting women and how sometimes, like you said, they're the custodian of culture. They're the ones that if you go this way, they're the ones that the voice will even be louder than the men. She said, women look at other women through the eyes of men. Do you agree with that statement? Is that where, I mean, I'm just thinking, she said, and nothing really like, Now women, because the culture is set, they hold it, but they look at other women through the eyes of men.
So I would say some women, not all women. So that's the difference. And like I said earlier, those women absolutely were exposed differently. They understood, sisterhood differently. They also would really rather a certain norm for how a woman should be, and if you check deeply, it's an unhappy state of mind. It's not coming from a place of acceptance, and it's coming from a place of conformity. And it's not as easy to demystify that kind of sect, because it's come from childhood and into adolescence and into adulthood. And if they are not exposed to the unlearning that of course that is afforded, you will continue to see that space widen. And that's why you see, when you hear men say women do not like each other, it's also emboldened by these kinds of stands. Because a lot of women would say to you that if you bring 5 women to probably run for office, all of them want to run at the same time. Nobody wants to give up for the other. However, that is the norm that the men set for women to have infighting and lack of believability to the process. I believe that the social space, whether it is politics, whether it is governance, whether it is leadership, is a place where it is an ecosystem for the fit and for the ones who are capable. If I have 5 qualified people, I'd rather say you run, go for the run. Put your hat in the ring and let's see the best of the lot. And when we get the best of the lot, that is where I now tend to perhaps look at it from a different prism. That when that best of the lot is identified, the other 4 need to come together, form a uniformity of thoughts and support for the ability for that one that represents the strength of the other to go forward. And I think that's where there is a misunderstanding. I think they misunderstand the ideal nature of competitiveness to mean combat, to mean confrontation, and it is not. The boys club have it, the men have it. It's just that they are more they utilize their energies in different stratospheres, and divide their energies amongst what their categories of elements, power, finances can actually shoulder. But women usually do not have that, so it's often louder. So I dare say that the men do that intentionally. And I think until women realize that, we will focus on the energies that promote rather than divide.
Definitely. Religion has both empowered and limited women. In your view, where have we gotten it wrong in the interpretation of faith regarding gender roles? Because why I say this is, a lot of times, people believe that some of this gender inequality is also supported by religion as well. I'm Christian faith, so you see in the Christian church, you find out that just recently in some churches, women are allowed to be reverend or pastor of church, and some churches still don't have women in those places. But aside from that, I feel that sends a message to the larger community as well. So what's your take on this issue?
Well, first of all, religion is very sensitive.
Very.
And like I said earlier, it also evolves around dynamics. So you're talking about different communities, different ethnic groups, and what they believe in, and their religion and their sects. We have the Muslim religion, we have Christian, we have traditional, and we have atheists. We have people who don't believe in anything and just believe in, that there is life and humanity thrives. And so what I would say is that if religion preaches violence, if it preaches exclusion, if it preaches manipulation, if it preaches, ostracization of thoughts, if it limits knowledge, then it is no longer religion. It is fanaticism.
Yes.
And what that does is that from onset, you already have a social space where people are conformed to think that this is normal and their way of life. And so those who walk into that space also tend to think that those who are doing it are also normal. And so you walk into a space where a religion perhaps allows and says, I give you, for instance, the Osinachi case comes to mind. And this is where socialization, tradition, and religion meet as a melting pot. Osinachi was a singer in the church and very involved in the religious activities of the church. However, not once, not twice, it was reported that they understood she lived in an aggressive environment, but was often counseled to go back to that space that re-traumatized her and exposed her to even graver danger. For two reasons. In Christianity, women must seem to be making their marriages work. In Christianity, women must submit to the men. And so that means that whatever happens, regardless of who's wrong or who's right, she's the fixer.
Yes.
And so that ideology that women are the fixers in religion keeps them limited, keeps them bounded to abusers, and keeps them recycling trauma in a place where they should have left a long time ago. And so you saw that, and then it went from being thrown back into the space to absolute silence from her until her passing. And it's so tragic, Dr. Chito.
It's so
tragic. And why it's so tragic for me is that in finding justice for Osinachi, an injustice has been done to the children. So you find that a woman is killed in cold blood by the husband. Justice takes its tough and sentences the man to death by hanging. The children are left orphans. Left back into the hands of socialization, which will recycle the trauma of the incident wherever they turn. And you speak to them in school from a place of pity, tragedy, and lacking sensitivity, because they're going to one day they're going to encounter, oh, what happened to your mom? Oh, my mom was killed by my dad. Where is your dad? Oh, my dad was sentenced to death by hanging for killing my mom. It's not a story.
It's horrible
for a child to recycle for the rest of his life.
It's horrible.
So you find that those children are exposed to trauma that continues to, and there is no closure from this, Dr. Chito. There is no closure for these children.
There's none.
There is no healing. I I don't see
But they
how.
do need counseling somehow.
Oh yes,
or
the
something.
counseling. No, but it's going to be very intentional.
Yes.
And very intense,
Yes.
especially for the female child.
Yes.
Especially for the
And
female.
cycles can also happen if not.
Exactly.
You find someone maybe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you might
Cycles.
find a child who is shut into herself to never think marriage, to think that
Yes.
Men are killers. You may see a boy child that continues to see that women are the reasons why men die or go to jail. Unless we find a way to start from the beginning, the conversation on Christianity enabling gender-based violence or religion enabling
we didn't really talk about
gender-based
that. We have not faced that issue at all. Yes,
we need
after
to
that incident.
really look at that. We haven't really started to have that conversation because people are still looking at the surface aesthetic conversation of justice for Osinachi, quote unquote.
Yes.
But what about the children? What about third cycle violence, where those who experience it never find closure and are traumatized?
Yes.
So it's a whole system of conversation.
And no, we're talking about Osinachi, but this is happening in more homes.
Of course, it's just a picture of what's going on. It's just a picture of what you see behind closed doors.
Yes.
I mean, we've heard about women, being macheted in their sleep.
Yes.
You've also heard about men, poisoned because, of course, when you're betrothed at an early age, you don't know who you're getting betrothed to.
Yes.
And sometimes these girls are betrothed to men way older than their fathers. They become debt liabilities. So it's in layers, Dr. Chito. And I think I go back again to family. The family is such an important ecosystem.
Yes.
And there needs to be a lot of, unbundling, unlearning, and, closure as well, because some mothers are broken before they become mothers.
Yes.
And do not know how to perhaps remove themselves from the newness of their role as mothers. And then finally, on the religion part, I would say that I do not think that any religion preaches, negativity to the point where it sort of reduces the essence of humanity.
Yes.
Once that begins to happen in those spaces, one needs to take a walk out of those spaces to reevaluate what's really important.
True.
Of course, we just had a new pope. You saw the processes.
Yes.
Again, it is how we embolden, empowering women voices within religion.
Yes.
The conclave happened. I didn't see any female. I don't know if we've gotten there yet. But, I'm just saying that it's also up to us within the religious space to see women fit to lead.
Yes.
And that's where we can even start the conversation.
I think that's important. I love that last part, to see women fit to lead. And that's important. Shifting this now to something that you've done in the past. So you've led key AU initiatives for financial inclusion. How does economic empowerment shift power dynamics from women in traditionally men societies?
Well, empowerment, I think there are two types of empowerment. And I think there is self-development. When one finds herself and what you were called to do, who you are, why you're here as a human being. That in itself, in finding self, you find purpose. And when you're now empowered, you bring deliverables to that purpose. And that's how I like to see it. So when you empower a woman who hasn't yet found herself or who doesn't understand purpose, so it's like you're pouring into a basket.
Yeah.
Right. So the water is touching the basket, is filling some parts of it, but it's always going to, filter out from the other side. So I usually say that in a patriarchal society, the first conversation to have in empowerment is mindset empowerment, mental empowerment. Who am I as a woman? What are the things that I have learned over the years that will limit me if I am empowered? Some women don't even think you should empower them. They would rather you empower their husbands or their brothers so that they can take care of them, the women. That's a mindset change that needs to happen.
Yes.
There are women who think that, I've had this conversations, I'm made for the soft life.
Yes.
I hear that a lot.
This is my soft life era.
Odogu, please. I need an odogu. You know, I've seen that it's become a craze for young girls, you know, on social media, and you're seeing the growth of women heightened by what they see, what they hear as the normalization of ethics for one, the standard of empowerment. So a girl would rather think that, oh, you fly her to Dubai 2 times, 3 times a month, you know, make sure that she goes to the spa, has money to buy all the luxurious hair, you know. But I don't hear you empower me to build a school.
Yes.
Or you empower me to set up businesses for young
Yes.
women. Or I go back to school and begin to mentor younger women.
Yeah.
I don't hear any of those. And it baffles me, because then it means that a lot of people will not understand. When you have nothing on the inside, when someone puts something inside you, it's like garbage in, garbage out, because there's no retainership.
Yes.
There's nothing to prepare you for sustainability. So you keep receiving and never build. And that's what I keep seeing. And so that's why I go back to mindset change. That's why I go back to a mental reorientation of what empowerment is first, because you need to know why you're being empowered. Who am I? What am I here for? You know, what can I also do with what I have as skills? So you first of all have innate skills. What it is you think that if somebody wakes you up from sleep now, you would love to do, before someone now builds those skills to be amplified so that they can be maximized. So that is the way I see empowerment for women in a patriarchal system, because already women are beginning to normalize patriarchy. And normalization of patriarchy does not only mean when men are in charge. Women have even also subtly given men rights over their well-being and their livelihood by saying things like, oh, I want to live a soft girl. Are you going to live a soft girl life if you don't work?
That's what I was wondering.
Save? Yes. If you don't build a business? If you don't grow people? How are you going to leave a legacy?
Okay. To them, that doesn't matter. Today matters.
The Odogo you are saying please to.
Yes.
Also worked hard to get to where
Very easy
is,
to be the Odogo for you.
Odogo for you. So are you going to take out all the Odogo-ness and leave him empty? So, you know, this kind of conversations, when you try to talk about it with them, they say, oh no, leave etc., please, you know. But the truth of the matter is that it is what it is.
Yes.
You know. And I am hopefully thinking that when we begin to raise our younger women, you know, even our women, to unlearn certain things and not to normalize what they think is the norm. Yes. You know, is the rave, is the craze. It's easier to take back that knowledge and reshape what empowerment is. I mean, people say empowerment and you think is giving people 5,000 bags of rice, sewing machine, you know, opening workshops for people to be trained. If you train someone who does not understand the ability that now that I'm trained, I need to be able to do something to be able to raise capital. Yes. To be able to put that training in practice. You will just train and next thing they'll say, Auntie, never give me equipment. What will I use this training to do? So it's a cycle. Yes. So we need to do a mindset shift.
A real mindset
shift. Empowering the mind before we empower the form. And the two go together. They cannot work outside each other.
That's amazing. I guess that's the only way that we can get equality.
Absolutely.
In a patriarchal society.
Absolutely.
My goodness.
Absolutely.
The one thing I'm going to say, and I know this is one area you've worked for many, many years, is media. Media is powerful. It's like you don't know anything until you know. Information and information sharing has been, I think, one of the greatest sounds or voices that we hear because without media, like this, even what we talked about now, if the media didn't say, okay, this is what's happening, well, let's dissect it, people may never know what happened. Nobody will talk about it. So whether it's digital media or social media or traditional media, it is so important. Now, with your work on AIT, how important do you think media is in re-educating the society about gender equality or changing the mindset about gender equality? Where does media come in?
So first of all, thank you for that question. I always say this: media is addiction. You always want more.
Yes.
The simplest way I explain the media. Media is addiction. You always want more. Now, what you want more of depends. And so that's why the media needs to reinvent the wheel. Because people are always going to want more. They want to see more. They want to hear more. They want to keep activating conversations, whether they know it or not. And so you see people sharing broadcasts. They have nothing to do with. They just say share, you say click. And so you find people going on conversations, jumping on comment boxes. You know, something is posted on Instagram, and the first thing you go is to the comment section. You don't even watch the narrative to the end.
No, the comment is the sweetest part.
Absolutely. You go on Facebook, you go on LinkedIn, all of that. And because reality is often taken out of context on some platforms, especially in the social media and the digital space, it is easy to amplify what's negative.
Yes.
Very easy. So the media in itself needs to do some home and house cleaning. And I say this because the conversation on gender-based violence or sexual and gender-based violence against women is often emboldened from normative conversations, gender identities, how we amplify women through stereotypes, how we do not protect the conversations around women to mean strength, but present them from a place of weakness. How we do not change the narrative that there are certain aspects of media and, you know, conversations, whether on print or TV or podcast, you know, that sexualizes the conversations for women, reduces them to the ability of their gender and chromosomes. So, for instance, you go on, and I say this often, you go on a conversation, the first thing the person will ask you, so how do you juggle being a woman?
Yes, I hear that a lot. Yes.
So how do you do the kids? How you know? So you get that, and the first thing you be like, you don't even know if I'm juggling in the first place. You know, so how do you know I'm juggling?
When they have to say I don't have balance,
exactly,
there's no balance.
Exactly. Or you ask the first lady, how does being the first lady, you know, how is it, you know, have a house? You never hear them ask the men, how do you take care of your kids and your job and running office, and, you know, you never hear that as a question, because the media in itself has a lot of subtle innuendos of patriarchy in every conversation. That is not loud, but is there.
Is there, yeah.
It's in how we look at our front pages and we don't see women's stories as headliners. It's how we see breaking news and it's not about what women are doing, you know, proudly so. It's always the alternative news or, you know, another news, you know. So we need to change that. And then I think finally on this is to do some introspection in media ownership and media leadership. Right from our newsrooms. What percentage or what quota of our news are inclusive? I mean, I have done this conversation. We've done training on it. We've written papers with policy direction on how it is important for media houses to begin. I mean, not just quota for special seats, but to have a certain percentage, at least a 10% quota of the news that leaves every news desk to be inclusive.
Yes.
To find expression on front pages, to talk about the good part and the enabling environment for women's stories to thrive, to begin to think about posterity and leading the young generation of women to new voices, to emerging women leaders. I mean, right from when I was young, I've heard about, you know, Fumilayo and Kuti, and I keep hearing, I mean, are there no people doing major stuff anymore?
That's what that has silenced.
Exactly.
Right. So that back then we had female.
So now we have a new age generation, women leaders who are doing great stuff. Young women too, young girls too. How do we amplify that?
Yes.
So I think in creating perhaps a restructuring of the narratives that guide the media and storytelling, we may just continue to have this patriarchy recycled in our conversation because it's emboldened by the forms and kinds of conversations that happen in the media. And I think media ownership too, we must begin to see that maybe someday we'll see National Broadcasting Corporation has a female chairman or a female DG. NOA should have a female DG. You know, Born should have a female DG. The Minister of Information, I mean, Dora Quinley, bless her soul. We must begin to see, because women are custodians of storytelling. They amplify, they build, and they create sustainable hand-holding between the young and the historians. And I think that's what we need to do. Until we do that, it's going to continue to be the conversations where how does the media shape? The media will continue to shape, but the media needs to shape itself.
Yes.
I think that's where we need to go back to. How can the media reshape itself and find expression that now creates inclusion in storytelling that makes sure that the issues that are the issues are dealt with but also amplify the strengths of women.
And this is important because I always say for young girls, what young girls see has impact.
Absolutely.
What young girls see, seeing women that or older that they feel I can beat this woman one day, it's very powerful. And that's why we talk about mentorship. But then you're right, showing the works on these media spaces and is so important. Because I see those comments, and there was one day I actually spent I don't know, I wasted 1 hour. I will not say wasted, but I mean they can get you going. And I saw this, I never write comments, but I saw this comment against, almost in support of gender violence or something that happened where someone assaulted someone else, a woman leader. And I think I wrote an epistle. As I write, I say, "Oh my God, this is this." This, and I looked at the other comment, like, okay, I'm done. But you're right. It's really, 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 really needs to be redefined, needs to be cleaned out. It really does. You ran for political office in 2019. And what barriers did you face as a woman? And what needs to change for more women to take leadership roles? Because I always find in this climb, when I see women running for office, I'm like, whew, because the terrain itself does not look smooth. It looks pretty rough. So what barriers did you face?
Tradition was one of them. Tradition. I also faced the exclusion within political structures. There is a conversation, quiet, almost silent conversation between the men, and there is only so far a woman can come in a particular political ecosystem, especially if she's a newbie like a first timer. Again, finance, because your run of plays against the men who had run before. So I ran as a first timer. I was the youngest, and the first female to ever try to run, especially from my constituency, to represent them at the state assembly. However, because I understood, having worked in the media and really understood the conversation of leaving mainstream media to go into the political space, I sort of was mentally prepared. But what I wasn't prepared was the extent of shock that you would get from even within intimate, close ecosystems, such as extended families like uncles and aunties and, even schoolmates, And so you are told that, this thing you're coming to do is not kakakyo, it's not talk show, or somebody is telling you that, how can you run against your uncle that you used to tie shoelaces for? I mean, just quickly step away. I mean, you can work with him, be his PA, and,
Wow.
Carry bags till, you learn the ropes. You also face, exclusion from the patriarchal queens who feel that, somebody that they have always worked with deserves to continue to be there, regardless of if he's doing the job or not, because certain stipends are always available to them alone and not for the, pleasure, or rather the import of the masses or the people that they serve. So you get a lot of that. You also get the issue of, having to hibernate your intelligence. I think that was the most difficult part, where because you were in the middle of mediocrity, you do not want to seemingly become like the only intelligent person in the room, or you do not want to, switch on the bulb when something is being said and you're like, oh no, that's not true. That will not. And then you just remember that you are in the midst, of quote unquote elder statesmen, and aunties and uncles, and you're rubbing your fingers, you're holding yourself, because you are taught that if you make the mistake of saying anything here, that's it. So it's a lot for a young woman, but it's even more for a woman who's coming from a place of knowledge and education and understanding how these conversations have been my touchlight, in my real-time career. And I'm here now and I'm supposed to amplify and I'm supposed to be the voice. But then you find out that ordinarily you have to learn to lobby, you have to learn to broker power, you have to stoop to conquer, you have to sometimes act stupid, behave like you don't know what's happening, but you know what's happening. Sometimes you have to also find a way to demystify what comes as mentorship, but really it's sexual harassment,
Yes.
in certain guises.
Yes.
So it was a lot of learning for me and a lot of unlearning. And the unlearning is to think that, certain people are ignorant of the norms. No, some people just know what they're doing, but they maximize and take the advantage of the spaces that they find themselves in. So for me, I think that tradition was the biggest umbrella where people hid under. They amplified it because I was running in the state. I was at the local government. I was at the community level, where the harbinger of tradition and culture is, it's like a light bulb. But what it did for me, in terms of finding some certain level of advantage, is that it empowered girl voices. Younger women now saw that, I can run for councillor.
Yes.
I can join a group. I can start an association. I can register to vote. I can belong to a political party. I can begin to work within the political party structure without even wanting to run elections. So
That's powerful.
Yeah, so I saw more younger women able to come out. I was able to register a lot of younger women into political party, the party in which I was. Women groups started to, multiply. Girls began to have voices, and even as when the election came and whatever played out, and I went and I became the special advisor, senior special assistant to the governor then, I still maintained that structure and continued to build the voices of the young women, and, started a conversation and a group called Educator. Okay. And Educator was, having to have a number of young women every year that I paid for their jams. And, while waiting for result, they would get mentorship. So it continued to grow. And that's the advantage. And I think that for me, what that taught me was that you do not have to run elections to be empowered or to power voices.
Yeah.
You can begin to build the blocks of change by being available, by showing up, and by contributing the quota that you can, when you can, and how you can. And if the possibility of perhaps a nomination emerged and something, say, to happen, the people that you have championed their voices will be ready to speak for you and champion your role.
Yes.
And that's what I saw. Wow. And so I would say that women shouldn't wait till they run elections or till they pick up a ticket. I think the greatest election is to empower more women voices.
Yes.
The greatest election is to be ready to serve.
Yes.
Even when you do not have a platform from where you are.
From where you are.
And I think that for me, that was the most beautiful outcome of that process.
Oh, this is powerful. There's one thing you said there that it seems to be a lot of women's issues, especially when you find yourself in a man's world, more to say, especially in our climb. Because we talked about certain things, and yes, gender equality issues are happening everywhere. But culture seems to really, really make this a harder obstacle to jump. And one of the things you said in this that I wanted to pick out, what you said, that thing about, sometimes you have to be like, you're intelligent, but you have to kind of, and it's yes, because something I have experienced. I mean, I've been directly told by someone, you need to learn. When I in Nigeria, one thing you need to learn, I'll tell you, serpentine wisdom. I said, what's that? What do you mean by serpentine wisdom? Meaning you need to know how to, and I'm like, I'm in trouble. That's why I always told myself I cannot be a politician, because serpentine wisdom is completely out of you need to know when to do this and when to do that. And I always say, even in normal work and relationship, that is so sad when sometimes we have to shrink ourselves to fit in, to move forward. Just to pass the base. We need to wiggle in, we need to shrink ourselves. And I feel that this is being normalized. And how do we get out of this? How do we break the wall? Like, I've seen a wall, and we are doing so much on this side of the wall, and we know the barriers. How do we now push down this wall? How can we break the wall? And there's enough of us that think like mine, this equality, about gender equality, but how do we push down the wall? The wall seems to not be budging too much.
No, with what you're doing, conversations, advocacy. Someone said, we've been talking. I said, and that's why we're where we are.
Yeah.
If we didn't talk at all,
we would have been anywhere
where we would have been.
True.
So conversations need to keep happening, and hand-holding across the fence. So my question is, who is on the other side of the fence?
Yes.
And who are we pushing against? It's still people that we may need. It could, I mean, of course, I would always say this: alliance building with the men, as collaborators, as leaders, is something that we cannot also do away with. It's so important, because at the end of the day, it's about human beings
True.
working together, not against each other.
Yes.
And so in understanding that hand holding across the world, oh, I'm thirsty, you pass it over the wall. I'm hungry, you pass the bread. So we need to do some, mental energy exchange.
Yes.
And it starts from the home, conversations quietly but firmly, on why it is important that boys and girls go to school. Boys can cook, girls can cook, girls can play football, boys can play football. So it's no longer about the XY chromosome.
Yes.
It's about, what are you fit to do? Where do you find capacity?
Yes.
It's about, resorting to leaning on, softer power and leaning on the stronger person.
Yes.
And that is what is represented in both the male and the female. And I feel that the men should also understand that the women are not there to come strip them off their ego or work against them or speak down on them. I think that what I see is that, even the men were taught to be powerful and to be all wanting and to be domineering and to be dominant. They were not taught to, broker with women. They were taught to broker with men.
Yes.
And so because that is also normalized and because that is traditionally imprinted in their mindset, a man grows up thinking that, yeah, woman, wait, I'll speak about this later. Can't you see I'm talking to my brother? Or you hear in my dialect, meaning that a man is talking and a woman is talking. How now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's all backgrounded in culture, and the only way we can demystify this is if the women also unlearn.
Yes.
Okay. If they also unlearn and are prepared to also be able to handhold through subtle teaching, guiding, especially now that they are having boys.
Yes.
So if not, those boys will be reprinted in the form of the men that we're trying to actually ask for alliances with. So,
and they have the power to do that.
Absolutely.
They have the biggest influence to do that, to be honest.
It's and it's like imagining the relationship between a mother and a son.
Yes.
Is so emotionally and knowledge driven and dependent on the emotions of the mother. So a boy child wants to be validated by his mom. He wants to know that his mom loves what he's doing. And so that's it. And I feel that if the women understand that kind of soft power, if I will use that, we will start early to teach collaboration, to teach, conurbation, that men and women can exist and work together.
Yes.
And have amazing results.
Yes.
And that a man can be all powerful, even with a powerful woman by his side.
Yes. I love that. Yes. So as the final question of this episode, I wanted to ask you, if you could rewrite one cultural or religious norm today to favor gender equality, what would it be and why?
Well, to rewrite culture, to change a cultural norm. I would rather say that I would refine culture.
Okay.
I believe that tradition has its place in history, in shaping identities, in evolving knowledge-driven research, especially knowing where you're coming from and where you're going. And that's why you see a lot of, when you have a lot of friends who are Black Americans looking for their ancestry and where they come from and what their roots are. And I think there's such a powerful force behind tradition and culture. However, what I would look at is, how do we refine it to mean sustainable progress, prosperity for all, justice and fairness, inclusion.
Yes.
Now, these values are what I would hope that, if I had the opportunity, that I would hope that from the beginning, culture is refined to evolve.
Yes.
And that's where the problem is. Culture, is tradition, but it needs to understand evolution. And that as people are born, times change. There are dynamics of evolution. People are also learning new things. And there is a sense of empowerment in evolving, however, maintaining the essence of that tradition. Nobody says, I mean, when they say women can inherit, and I say why? When a family has children that are all female, you leave the 5 female to go to an uncle that has
Which
a boy.
is, yes.
It is tragic.
Very tragic.
So that is injustice of the highest order.
Yes.
So we need to look at those kinds of norms and say, the idea of inheritance is good, but it must be an inheritance that suits all.
Yes.
No one is
all
saying
children equally.
Yes. Nobody is saying the men shouldn't inherit. But we're also saying that women are human beings, daughters are human beings.
And children of that person.
Absolutely.
Same. Came out the same way.
And the conversation on that will now embolden the appreciation of a child as a child, not as a gender. Yes. And so when people have baby boys, like, what did she have? You know? And so there's a breaking of praise when the person has a child that is a boy. And there's an admission of, oh, thank God, when the child they have is a girl. So those kind of tradition and culture, if we refine, will help to find a melting pot for all of this, subsects within the traditional ecosystem. And it will also help to build the ability to appreciate education and knowledge building. So I would not necessarily change the concept of culture and tradition. I would say let's refine it so that it can appreciate evolution as things happen.
Yeah. How about religion? Religion is very powerful. And I know it's a very sensitive area, but I cannot help but say about religion, because Nigeria is a religious society. Nigeria is very strong in terms of religion. And I believe they have the platform and the power to influence this change that we're looking at in terms of gender equality and, of course, reducing gender-based violence and so much that affects the woman, the female gender. And I don't know, what's your take? What is that thing? Because I feel that we can't leave them out in this.
I think that religion should go back to the place where it was still religion. I think religion has evolved to sociology and socialization of norms, whereby what is acceptable is now predicated on what you can interpret using religion. I believe that if religion were to say that violence against women is a crime,
yes,
we would find more women saved within the church.
Very true.
If we were to say that killing human beings and, gunning down people in cold blood and, fighting a jihad would kill lots of people, whether men, women, and children, we would remove the fanaticism from the practice, perhaps from those from other cultures and religion like Islam. But religion in itself is a fulcrum. And why I say that is that certain culture are dependent and coexisting with religion. And so in refining culture and tradition, you also try to review interpretation of religious sects. And what I would say this is, Nigeria is a very religious country. So you are looking at where does religiosity come and where does spirituality come. So we are more religious, more, book abiding, more prophecy driven than our own innate relationship with our maker. What does good and evil mean to you as a human being?
Yes.
And I think if we do that, we will stop seeing religion move into politics. We will stop seeing religion move into warfare. And that's where we can find a tide.
This was an amazing conversation, and thank you, Adaora, for coming here today. This is I think one of my best conversations I've ever had on gender equality. So I'm so excited. What a powerful necessary conversation with the incredible Adaora Onyechere-Sydney Jack, a woman who is not just speaking truth, but actively reshaping the systems that hold women back. In this episode, we've unpacked the deep ties between culture, religion, and gender. But more importantly, we have heard bold, solution-driven steps for creating a more inclusive and equitable Nigeria. If there's one thing this episode reminds us of, is this: we can honor our faith and culture while boldly challenging the parts that silence, sideline, or suppress women. Change doesn't mean losing who we are. It means becoming who we're meant to be as individuals and as a society. Let's keep the conversation going in our homes, our faith spaces, and our communities, because real transformation begins when we fix it from the roots. Watch now on YouTube, HERcast with Dr. Chito. Listen on your favorite podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple, Google, etc. Follow us at HERcast Podcast and at Dr. Chito N. Tune in on Rapid TV, Startimes Channel 176, Saturday 7 p.m. and Sunday 2 p.m. Until next time, stay bold, stay rooted, and keep rising. Thank you.